Hi, I'm Chris McCoy, and I'm here with Jackson Baker, and this is the Memphis Flyer Podcast. Every week we hop here on YouTube and we tell you about what's going on in the paper, what our reporters and writers are working on. And this week, of course, the big news is the election, and I'm going to talk to Jackson about that here in just a second. But let me tell you what are some of the other stories that are in the paper this week. Michael Donahue has a story about Chez Philippe, which is one of the great old restaurants in Memphis that's been around forever and everybody loves it. Um, he also wrote about a Tina Turner tribute band that has been, for music, that has been really tearing things up around here lately. Um, Abigail Marisi wrote about a contemporary arts Memphis new program. They're doing a month-long sleepaway camp, art sleepaway camp this summer. It's going to be 3 weeks here in Memphis and 1 week in New York City, which is exciting. Sounds like I would like to do that, you know, but I can't because I'm not a kid. And I reviewed a film called Will and Harper that's on just hit Netflix. And Will and Harper is Will Ferrell and this Harper Steele, who is a transsexual. She was a writer for SNL that started at the same time as Will Ferrell started, and at that time she was Andrew Steele, and became head writer in 2006. But a lot of those great old Will Ferrell skits on SNL, Andrew Steele wrote, and they became really, really good friends. And then, but Andrew Steele had gender dysmorphia the entire time. Didn't tell anybody, couldn't tell anybody, and eventually got a divorce, and just sent emails around to all of her friends saying that she was going to begin transitioning, and somewhere along the line, she and Will, who was her best friend, Will Ferrell, decided that they were going to go on a road trip together across America to sort of reintroduce Harper Steele to the country, because they used to do this all the time. Harper, her big hobby basically was going on big meandering road trips and going to small town dive bars and stuff, and so she wanted to do that again. This time, identifying as female, and just to see how it worked. And it's a really interesting movie. It's a really moving film, I think. I could say a lot about it, and I do, and you should check it out online or get a physical copy of the Memphis Flyer. We love those physical copies, don't we, Jackson?
You bet.
And yeah, right here, right here. I don't know. We always love to introduce Squishy here. This is a box. You can see boxes like these all over town, and grab a physical copy of the Flyer. And this one had a little encounter with a car and got retired, but so that's why we're bringing him on. Speaking of cars, Will and Harper go on this road trip, and one of the really striking things about it is they went to all kinds of small towns and all kinds of throughout the Midwest. They drove all the way from New York to Laguna Beach, California, and went through Vegas and everything. Went through Texas, and I think that they expected, and I certainly expected, a lot more overt transphobia to happen during their trip. And it really didn't happen in person, except for on one occasion that was actually in the movie. And that was in Amarillo, Texas, at a steakhouse. But even that was pretty subtle in the big picture. Even Harper went into a dive bar in the Midwest that had, or in Oklahoma rather, that was like filled with Donald Trump signs and had a sign that said "Fuck Joe Biden" and everything. And people were nice and friendly there, and they even had a couple of Native American guys like sing them a song and play drums, like pound on the drums for them. But where the real transphobia came in, where the real hate speech was happening, was online, when people would post pictures of Will and Harper on this road trip. And to me, that says something I know there's something that I've been noticing or thinking about a lot, that it's really much more difficult to hate people that you interact with and are in the same room with. But it's real easy to dehumanize and hate people online. And in fact, if you do that online in a lot of these social media spaces, you'll get more engagement because the heightened emotion attracts more people and attracts more eyeballs. And the platforms see this as positive engagement. They see turning people against each other as positive engagement. But anyways, highly recommend Will and Harper to everybody. Probably the best documentary I've seen this year. And it's on Netflix right now. And it's really thought-provoking, especially, I think, in light of the election that just happened on Tuesday, which was a bit of a surprise, I think, Jackson.
Well, it certainly surprised all the pollsters who were almost 100% wrong. And that leads us to wonder, can you take a poll these days, in the days of cell phones as against landlines, as against that subterranean flow of sub-news online, which people trust more than they do actual news from the legacy media. And that's a serious problem. Are we correctly informed?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no. We are not. There's a big chunk of people who are not correctly informed. And talking about the polls just for a second, some of the numbers that I've seen, in the old days when everybody had a landline in their phone, these pollsters would get sometimes 60% participation rate. So 6 in 10 people they called would actually pick up the phone and talk to them. Now, all of these polls, all of them, have had 1% or less. It is not a representative sample of people. It's not. And so what they try to do is they try to take this really noisy and incomplete data and fit it into a model, what they believe of the electorate, who is going to show up and who's not going to show up. And then they try to extrapolate from here. But it was a huge polling miss, and people were, the last 2 weeks at least, it looked like it was going to be, neck and neck. It hadn't really changed, but that really turned out to be an artifact of the models, didn't it?
Yeah. Now, whereas the polling problem was disappointing as it turned out, because we all relied on the polls that showed this was an even Steven race, and it wasn't even Steven ultimately, although it wasn't shaded that badly toward Trump, but it was shaded toward Trump. There's no question about that. He actually is going to win a majority of the vote for the first time ever.
It's
But
stunning to me.
The question is not whether the polls were right or wrong. The question is that the real polls, the ones that were taken through early voting at election day, they were almost certainly right. And the answer they gave us is not the one we expected. It is the one we'll have to live with. But, I'm wondering how we're going to live with certain aspects of what is to come. For example, I have a hard time imagining how we're going to deport that 2.5 million people, or whatever number we're going to actually get out of here on airplanes, buses, whatever means. That is going to be an enormous snarl. We've been in traffic jams. That's got to be a reverse jam on the borders, and it's going to affect things that we take for granted. For example, we hope that the housing industry gets new starts. And under the plan proposed by the defeated Democratic candidate, new housing starts were part of the idea. But, all you had to do during the last time we had a housing boom was look and see who was building the houses. It was Mexicans. And where'd they come from? They came across the border, probably most of them illegal. They sent money back home and probably finally went back home themselves without menacing many people. The number of people who crossed the border and menaced people who have lived here for centuries is very small.
It's minuscule, yeah. but he played on fear and xenophobia, and I feel like he made people think that things that were not not really the result of immigration were because of immigration. And it's like people felt My mother was a poll worker. She's been a poll worker for many, many years. And she said, and this was in Tennessee, in Middle Tennessee, and she said she had a ton of new voters, people who'd never voted before, who were there to vote for Trump, and that they were, what she said to me, what she heard at the and this is anecdata, right? It's an anecdote, so take it what you will. But there does seem to have been a big shift in rural counties, And she said that that the people were had been saying to her for weeks, and was that they were not better off than they were 4 years ago. That they haven't recovered from the pandemic, and a lot of that pandemic money, that support money, had gone away, and it really hurt them bad. And that their grocery costs were way up, and they were very upset about that. And they blamed the Biden administration.
Well, this is not the first time that inflation has caused a change in the political structure. Back when Jimmy Carter was president, inflation rose to 20%, or something just really outrageous.
Yeah.
And Reagan, of course, candidate Reagan became President Reagan on the basis of that. That was understandable. The inflation we've had to live with the last few years has been minuscule by comparison, and it has been receding, visibly receding in the last 6 months. It's in the same sense that traffic across the border had been receding in the last 6 months too. Both those supposed menaces had been abating, and yet the concept, accepted by everybody, the press included, that these were problems, just remained with the electorate, and they chose to vote their convictions on them. This guy who says, without giving any kind of plan for how he's going to do it, he's going to fix that. That's all he tells us. He's going to fix it. Only he can fix it.
Yeah.
And yet there's not. When asked about how he would do it, he always demurred on that. You began our conversation with the public with the anecdote about Will Lynn Harper. That is one of the unspoken issues of this election. As Joe Yarborough on Morning Joe program I religiously watch, which has been part of the resistance all this time, by the way.
Joe Scarborough.
Yeah. What did I say? Yarborough, Joe Scarborough. Yeah. As he pointed out, that commercial showing the Democratic candidate, when she was not the Democratic candidate for president in 2019, she was one of several fledgling possibilities, saying she wanted to. She was in favor of taxpayer funding of transsexual operations. They played that thing over and over. Every time there was a football game, you saw it. Every time there was a baseball game, you saw it. Every time they assumed that there was a large male audience watching television, you saw that commercial. And, as Scarborough pointed out, the Democrats never responded to it, because how do you respond to that? First of all, the transsexual problem, quote unquote, is not really a problem. It's such a minor instance of what goes on these days. It does happen. And taxpayer funding is probably, however, to what extent that exists, is going to be a very modest part of taxpayer spending.
I mean, I've never known a transsexual person get their transition paid for with taxpayer money.
In fact, the only case I'm familiar with is the son of our good friend Chris Davis, my colleague, our colleague Chris Davis, whom I met this summer in Chicago, engaging young fellow. And I don't think taxpayers paid a cent of his transition. And he seems to be coping with things and dealing with his transition really marvelously well. The number of people undergoing such transitions is very small. It's going to remain very small. We're going to see not going to see a mass epidemic of sexual transitions.
No, because I think people think that it's some kind of social pressure or whatever. It's not. It's a giant life change, and it's going to cost you a lot, and it's going to be really hard on you. And if you decide to do that, it's because you have to do it. I think it's because it's deeply ingrained in you and who you are. People don't do that lightly.
And Joe Scarborough points out that it is highly likely that a lot of people in those rural areas saw those commercials as they watched their ball game and thought, we can't let this happen. They're destroying all my values, and totally magnifying a problem that really doesn't exist in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And you know what other people do with their bodies, that's not your problem.
And the same thing is true in a certain sense on the abortion issue, which Democrats were counting on to be a source of votes. There is a curve that consists of people's attitudes toward reproductive freedom, and at a certain point, the general's acceptance of reproductive freedom and support of that turns into anxiety about too many abortions. And I think in the rural areas that we were on the bad side of that curve. That probably influenced a whole lot of votes, just as the concern about inflation and the border influenced votes. Beyond that, the fact is, what is the Democratic Party these days? It is college-educated people. Mm-hmm. And Democrats look for votes in the suburbs among college-educated folks. And it is, to a much lesser degree than historically has been the case, working-class people. That's one of the facts that has dismayed a lot of Democratic candidates who used to rely on union labor support. Mm-hmm. And a lot of union members are still strong in support of their unions, but they don't make a connection between Democratic candidates and what they in their daily living. Mm-hmm. All those things are problems, but in any case, we have what we have, and the issue is, how do we deal with it? Can we be optimistic and assume that Trump will somehow turn over a new leaf and do the right thing? Well, if he lets RFK Jr. go wild as a health czar, I don't see how that could possibly turn out well. We grew up, you and I grew up, in an era in which vaccines were an accepted part of the landscape, and we eradicated all kinds of things, mumps, measles, and all kinds of things, which used to be serious scourges, smallpox, serious scourges on the body politic. Well, if RFK Jr. becomes health czar, and
which is not a thing, by the way. Like, there's not a health czar.
Well, there may
office.
Be under Trump, though.
Yeah.
That's what I'm assuming, because he likes to use the term czar. But if he has any degree of serious influence over healthcare policy, then I think we're in for a serious problem. We're going to see epidemics that we haven't even dreamed of. Mm-hmm. And there are just all kinds of problems that I don't see getting better. I wonder how to keep them from getting worse. I don't know what Trump will do, what he has even promised to do, that is in the general welfare.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything that looks good.
I think, for example, you and I have also grown up in an era in which we assumed that we were the leader of an international alliance that was functioning and keeping us, at some high level of safety in the world. Well, if we scrap NATO, which Trump has actually talked about doing, that's all endangered. And in particular, I don't want to see Ukraine, after all the blood they've shed, after all the treasure we have poured into their heroic effort to remain independent. I don't want to see that capsized on day one, as Trump has promised he will do. He will see the end of that war on day one. All he has to do is to say to his friend Vladimir Putin, "Okay, take it over. It's okay." And the war's over. Yeah, sure, the war's over. The war was over in France when Hitler took over,
Yeah.
There are ways of ending wars that are not desirable.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, the whole NATO thing scares me, honestly. The whole, and I don't want to look like Putin's Russia here either. I don't want to be controlled by oligarchs. I don't want reprisals.
So what we do in the meantime, while I'm back on the list of things to worry about, I do worry about this dig baby dig, drill baby drill. We are already, obviously, we have lived through so many different environmental disasters. We should know that we are negatively influencing the planet we live on. And if we're going to do more of the stuff that caused these disasters, that according to almost every scientific reckoning is.
We just lived through 2 catastrophic storms in a row And it's November now, and we should be out of hurricane season, and there is another hurricane that's about to hit Texas later this week. And you hear what happened in Spain, in southern Spain? Southern Spain, Valencia, Spain, got a year's worth of precipitation in 8 hours. A year's worth of precipitation in 8 hours. 300, something like 200 people died, and the city is completely, destroyed. And that is 100% because of climate change. And it's going to keep happening, and it's going to keep getting worse. I saw somebody describe climate change, the experience of climate change, as you see progressively more horrific videos online of climate disasters, and then one day you're the person holding the camera. Trump's and the Republicans' constituency includes significantly fossil fuel executives, fossil fuel workers.
Sure.
And that's what he's going to do. I don't. There's no happy ending to that.
And the other thing that's going to happen is apparently we're going to get either a definite extension of the corporate tax cuts that we got in the first Trump administration, or we're going to get new ones. And we're not going to get middle-class tax cuts. That's something that the Democratic Party promised, but obviously is not going to turn out. Now, let us face it, Chris, the fact is, if we believe in democracy and in the will of the people, maybe we're wrong. Is it possible we're wrong about these misgivings? I don't think so.
No. Well, you can control somebody's behavior if you control enough of their information inputs, right? And I think that's what's happening here. This is an extremely propagandized population. I mean, honestly, the Soviet Union had nothing on what we're seeing now, and you can tell, Fox News all over the place. And not just that, but, now with with a lot of podcasts and everything, because the barrier, obviously, because we're doing it, the barrier to entry on creating a podcast is very low. Okay. So they proliferated, and people find find a podcast that they like, a voice that they trust. And it's not all just Joe Rogan. It's a lot of other people too. And a lot of those podcasters, they don't have journalistic standards at all.
Well, and it's not just podcasts. It's not just the new media. It's the legacy media is not what it used to be. More people watch Fox News than watch any other news source. Mm-hmm. Fox News is notoriously a propaganda organ for the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody seriously doubts that. Mm-hmm. Now, MSNBC, let's face it, is a bit of a propaganda organ for liberals, but it's a very degree of bias is considerable degrees less than that of Fox, and fewer people are influenced by it.
I wouldn't call it a propaganda outlet, but it is definitely, because it has journalistic standards that Fox doesn't, but it is definitely tilted towards a more left-wing audience. It's serving that audience, And I think also what you saw, because I thought during this entire cycle that the mainstream press, the old press, just did a terrible job, just awful. And you saw what happened when the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos ordered the Washington Post not to endorse Kamala Harris. They lost 10% of their subscribers in 3 days, and because of that. But who knows? Jeff Bezos doesn't care because he's got more money than Croesus,
And the Washington Post is probably the least of his holdings that concerns him.
Yeah, it's pocket change to him.
Amazon is the big thing.
Yeah. I mean, so that's been my impression. You have been in this game a lot longer than I have, and you've seen a lot. And you've forgotten more about journalism than I will ever know. So what did you think about that issue? What did you think about how the legacy media met the challenge of this election season?
Well, I just don't think, for reasons that you just enumerated, the legacy media has the same weight it used to have. But insofar as it does have weight, it seems to have developed all kinds of paranoia about employing its resources. Now, I just moved house pretty recently, and a lot of my mail is just now getting to me late. I've been subscribing to the New York Times on Sunday, and I got just yesterday, I went to my mailbox and got a mid-October issue of the Sunday New York Times, and I'm perusing it, and they had an editorial endorsing Kamala Harris. I thought, well, somebody did.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but obviously, the readers of the Post are of the same persuasion as the rhetoric and backers of Kamala Harris. They're essentially the same. When you have Bezos saying, "No, we can't say that," though, that is a streak of paranoia that's ominous. He's extended the paranoia to cover our outcomes as well as his own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the Washington Post. The LA Times did the same thing. They're
at the behest of their billionaire owner.
Yeah. And we're in an age in which the billionaires think that they're getting things their way, but the billionaires live on the same planet that we do. And even in the long run, are they really going to come off so well? I think it's a fact that gets lost in people's reckonings that standards of living are appreciably higher during Democratic administrations. This is provable than they have been in Republican administrations. Recessions are deeper in Republican administrations. We just dug out of one when there was the last change from Republican to Democratic.
In record time. In record time. I will say though, I think that letting that child tax credit expire really hurt the Democrats a lot. I think that was because that was tangible pain for a lot of people who had seen, who had help paying for their children, paying for everything, all the expenses that goes along with that. And then that was yanked out from under them.
Now, if there is a ray of sunshine in this new administration, and there aren't going to be many, one of them is from the new vice president, J.D. Vance, who is for the child tax credit.
Yeah.
And is propagandizing for it. Well, I hope he gets his way. He's kind of an asshole, by the way.
I do not care for him. I remember that my first exposure to him, I'd heard about Hillbilly Elegy, and then but I never read it. And I'm from the mountains.
Yeah.
I'm from Middle Tennessee, Middle East Tennessee, like the eastern edge of Middle Tennessee. So it's like half my county is mountainous, and it's sort of Appalachian and the Cumberland Plateau, but I'm intimately familiar with that whole. I mean, I came out of that culture too, is what I'm saying, And that movie was terrible. It was condescending, for one thing, and it was just and I'm theoretically the target audience for that film too, So. That was my first, exposure.
And by the way, not only did J.D. Vance have kind of a serious manifestation during the campaign, for better or for worse, the Democratic, his Democratic counterpart, Tim Walz, sort of disappeared, faded out in the middle of that campaign, and his good football coach, salt of the earth persona ceased to influence anything.
I will say, I thought that Harris ran a fairly good campaign, especially given the circumstances. But I think that trying to get Republican votes, like she did in the last, month or so of the campaign, was a huge mistake. It obviously didn't pay off.
Yeah.
But I mean, I see the logic of it. I've always, people are like, why do they do this? Well, any regular politician that's not Trump runs to the middle in that phase of the campaign. But the logic of it is, if you pick off one Republican voter, that's changing the result by 2, right?
Yeah.
And if you pick up somebody that was not going to vote, but then decides to vote, that's only picking up 1, And also, there was a lot of opposition in the Republican Party to Trump. And you could see it in the primary results, where even after Nikki Haley dropped out, she was getting 15%. Well, if you could knock 15% off of his total, then theoretically you would beat him, which it looks like they did. He's going to get fewer votes than he got in 2020. But then people did not show up for the Democrats. People did not show up for Harris, despite the fact that they spent $1 billion. They had a giant turnout machine, and people didn't show up. It didn't work. That to me is like, where'd all that money go? Why didn't those people show up? You know? And also, we talked about the transsexual issue, which frankly is not an issue to me, but the transsexual issue, the exit polls that you saw, that I've been seeing, that didn't show up anywhere as an issue that people were concerned about. That didn't show up anywhere.
It certainly showed up in the Republican advertising, and we don't know to what degree there was some subliminal effect of that.
Yeah.
But because it's one of those issues that people don't really know how to discuss, how to talk about.
I've read before that Republican voters, conservative voters, they try to activate their voters through feelings of disgust. And I think that for a certain slice of people, the transsexual issues triggered disgust in them, and so I think that's part of it. But more people did not show up to vote for Trump this time. Fewer people showed up to vote for Harris than showed up to vote for Biden.
In some ways, this issue goes back to something that was pinpointed by the writer Thomas Frank, who wrote the book "What's the Matter with Kansas?" about people apparently voting against their own interests. He had a follow-up volume that was published in 2016, in fact, called Listen Liberal, which looked at the campaign at that point being run by Hillary Clinton, and pointed out that she was devoting so much of her energy to capturing the suburbs, the suburban vote, and extrapolating that into what this year the so-called Never Trumper vote, which didn't exist in the volume
that they thought it was.
That they thought it was. And at the same time, we're not paying proper homage to the working class base. She was not even dealing with the so-called blue wall states. The first time they were lost to Trump. Biden, actually, for all of his failings, and they were obvious, one of them just being an old coot, he couldn't do much about that. He probably should have opted out of a race a year before he did.
I really think he should have opted out. I don't think he should have run. I think he should have announced in 2023 that he wasn't going to run and let us have a proper primary and everything. That was what I signed up for, and I thought Biden was a fairly good president.
Oh, I think he was a successful president. In so many ways, despite intractable opposition from the Republicans in Congress.
He got more out of them than anybody.
But here we are, and we have to hope for the best. And I think it's going to be hard to see where the best it's going to come from. I wish I knew.
Yeah, me too. Well, not to end on a downer, but we're going to end on a downer. Jackson, always a pleasure to talk to you. I don't know anybody that knows more about politics than you, and we're so lucky to have you on our staff and writing for us. Keep the faith, y'all. This has been the Memphis Flyer Podcast. We'll see you next week.